Slide cable issues are fun, aren't they? They're even more fun to fix. I'm assuming if you're watching this video, you have a broken slide cable, you're trying to figure out how to change. Let me show you how to do it. I didn't think much about our 4 slides having all the slide cables on it until I started having problems with them. Then it dawned on me I have 32 slide cables on this RV between the 4 slides. So now I carry 2 or 3 spare slide cables so I can change these if I have a problem when I'm traveling down the road. It's a fairly complicated system, but once you break it down step by step, it's not that bad to change them. I'm going to walk through the process and how to change it. These are the tools and supplies you're going to need for the process. First of all, you're going to need a cable wire rope cutter, and you're going to need a swagging tool, which is a big cable crimper. You're also going to need a 3/8 ratchet wrench, because it's a very tight spot to get into, and some sort of vice grips or pliers to hold the cable while you're tightening it. You're going to need some blocking and a jack of some sort before you cut the cable so it supports the slide, because that cable is still attached at this point in our case, and it's holding the weight of the slide all the way out. While we're editing this, I realized I forgot some tools. I'll have the complete list in the description down below. We happen to be lucky with this slide in particular. We don't have trim I have to remove. I'm able to reach above it when I bring the slide in halfway. To do the repair, I can reach all the spots without having to pull all the trim off. If you have a slide that's in a tight spot like a bedroom or a bonus room, you'd have to remove all that trim so you can access the mechanism to change the slide cable and then put it back on afterwards. Now let's get this cable changed. When you're working on the slide cables, you don't want the slide all the way in or all the way out. Ideally, you want it around halfway. For this slide in our living room, I have to have it out just a little bit past halfway so I can squeeze between the wall and the slide to work on the inside. To support the slide, I use some of my leveling blocks and a block of wood, along with my bottle jack I use for changing tires. Stack them up underneath of it. We only need to take a little bit of the weight off so when we cut the cable at the top, it doesn't put extra stress on the slide, the other cables, or the framing on the RV. When you bring your jack close to the top, make sure you put a block of wood on top of it. That way you're not pushing the jack right against the slide. It spreads the weight out a little bit so you don't create any damage that isn't needed. After we take a little bit of weight off the bottom of the slide, I'll verify there isn't too much tension on the cable. Then we'll get our ladder in place and ready to cut it. Make sure you have some safety glasses and gloves on for this because you can have some parts flying when you cut the cable. So you cut it once, a little bit long, and you'll cut a little bit shorter to make sure you have a clean end. That way you're not working with frayed pieces as you're pulling through the RV. To get the rest of the old cable out of the way, there's a little rubber piece behind there. We'll pull it out with a pair of pliers, slide the cable out, and now we're ready for the new cable. I'm going to try something new with this new cable. I usually put a little bit of duct tape on the end of these cables where I know they rub a little bit on the metal on metal. I'm going to slide some heat shrink over top the cable, slide it all the way to the end where it hooks onto the outside of the RV, heat up one piece, and I'll double it up so we have a little bit of thickness out there to hopefully provide a little bit of protection, make these cables last a little bit longer. The kit comes with a sleeve to pull a new cable through using the old cable. How this works, you slide the cable in, and when you pull on it, it tightens on itself. You do want to put a little bit of tape on the end so it doesn't slide off, that way it tightens on itself first. Sometimes the tape will hold, sometimes it won't, but you do need to put a little tape on the end of the cable also to get it slid in, especially on the cable you cut because it has frayed ends, it'll catch on that little sleeve, and you'll be fighting it all day long without something for it to slide inside of the sleeve. Once you have a cable secure in the sleeve, it's time to pull a new cable inside the RV. It does help to have a partner for this so they can guide the cable on the outside. If you don't, you just pull easy on the inside. There's a couple pulleys the cable has to go through, so be careful. If you pull too hard, you can pull the end of the cable out, then you'll have to fish it out of the wall, just like I did. So now we're going to take a flashlight and try to find the cable through the pulleys. This one is at the top, so it shouldn't be too difficult. I took the one screw out of the trim on the inside so I can see behind that to try to find the cable where I lost it at the end of the sleeve. It wasn't too far off, it's right at the end of the pulley. Once I found it, I was able to use a screwdriver to push it up through the pulley using the hole from the inside cable. So we slowly went back and forth from the outside of the RV, pushing the cable in, and the inside of the RV, working the cable up. So it was a slow process to get it up with a couple different varieties of screwdriver sizes and a pair of pliers at the end. Eventually I got the cable up and around to the inside so I can hook it up. As you're pulling the cable through, you want to make sure you don't pull too much through. Then you have to fish the cable out of the wall one more time So go back and forth, make sure you get the cable pretty close, and once it's close enough, you can hook it to the outside of the RV and secure that with a rubber piece again, and then you can pull the cable the rest of the way to the inside to start hooking it up in the mechanism. To pull the old cable off the rest of the way, there's a little foam piece on the mechanism that keeps the nut from loosening up as the slide works or you travel with the RV. So pull that nut off, get the old cable out of the way. We'll put the new eyelet in place into the mechanism before we feed the cable on. Only put it on a couple threads with that nut. That way your cable is as long as possible after you crimp it, so you have plenty of room to tighten it up. So we'll feed it through the crimp connector on both sides of the eyelet, pull it tight, and go to the outside of the RV as well to make sure it is tight on the outside. That way when you crimp it, you're not having to throw this cable away, because once you crimp it, that is a one-shot deal. So we'll tighten it up, hold it in place, and bring it down to the crimper. As we're holding it, you see this is a point that might help to have a partner, so you can crimp this cable and not have to struggle a little bit. So once you crimp it on one side of the connector, flip it over, so that way both cables end up being crimped inside of this crimp connector, and it's going to be secure and not go anywhere. After you have the cable crimped, we're going to cut off the extra. I usually go a few inches past the connector. That way it's not going to be too short, just in case I need an extra cable for some reason. Then we'll tape that together. Doesn't give any strength for that. It just keeps it, you're not poking your finger on it when you're working around that cable. So we'll feed it back in place. We'll get the nut on the end of this. Once the nut is there, we can start using a ratchet wrench to take a little bit of slack out of the cable. And once it gets a little bit too hard to hold with my fingers, then you'll use the pliers to hold the cable so you can tighten up the rest of the way. You'll tighten it up to the point where it feels like you have it about right. It's going to loosen up once you move the slide in and out a couple times. A good way to gauge if your cable's about right, we're looking at the connector. They should be pretty straight up and down. When a cable feels pretty tight and the connector's straight up and down, we can go outside and see how much tension's on the cable. Ideally what you're looking for is you want around a ½ inch of slack when you pull a cable. So run the slide out all the way, back in, back and forth. If there's too much slack, we'll bring it back in, go on top, retighten, or loosen if it happens to be too tight. The last thing to do on your cable change, once your adjustments are all made, is put the foam piece on the end, and where your nut doesn't loosen up, and now you are all set. It was a hot, sweaty day to change the slide cable, but it is fixed, everything is working and adjusted properly. I didn't go through the full inner workings of the slide system or how to make all the adjustments onto it. I'll post a link in the description down below of the BAL Accu-Slide system. They do a full inner workings video of how to make adjustments, how the whole system works, so to help you out. To start with that, before you have to make your slide cable change, I put some heat shrink on my cable on the end this time versus duct tape like I normally do. That helps keep a little bit of the vibrating cable from rubbing on the metal, which eventually fatigues the cable, wears through, and then it breaks. On this cable in particular, it was wearing through where it broke one of the strands. That's why I changed it out before I had a full broken cable. I will post an update in the description down below to let you know if the heat shrink or the duct tape worked any better. If you have any questions, put a comment down below. I'll be happy to answer them and help you out so your slide cable systems work like they should be. Good luck, and we'll see you in the next video.